Greetings, friends. Prepare for another thrilling journey as we delve into Reddit's most bizarre tales. We're plunging deep into the quirkiest corners of the web. Grab your popcorn and join us on this adventure. Remember to hit subscribe and like. Let's begin. Last week, I celebrated my 20th wedding anniversary. And like every other anniversary, I die a little inside when anyone raves about the success of my marriage. Because everything was built on lies. The backstory is a bit long, so I apologize. My wife and I first met and began dating in high school, and continued through college. After graduating junior college, we got married at 20 years of age, bought a starter home, and began our lives like any young couple. Money was tight due to bills and expenses, but we coped just fine. Perhaps I did more so, as having my own place now gave me the perfect venue to host my friends. I may have legally been an adult with a house and career, but deep down, I was still the same teenage boy I had always been and continued doing the things I like to do. Such a situation was partly possible because of my wife's new career. She worked hours opposite mine and soon after had her own friends and new coworkers to hang out with. Although we now live together, we quickly spent less time together because of our opposing work schedules. Having the house to myself was the perfect excuse to invite friends over. Granted, we still spent time together and did plenty of couples activities, but the reality was I had my friends over more often than anything. She eventually accepted this and soon after leaned into her own social groups instead. This really accelerated nearly a year after our wedding when she turned 21. Our birthday was not for another 8 months. Immediately following her birthday, she began hanging out with her friends and coworkers much more often as she now had access to bars and such. Originally, she wasn't really much of a drinker, but quickly grew into it. Eventually, she was out partying with her friends and coworkers all the time. And I didn't care. I was able to hang out with mine even more often because of that. I'm not saying we didn't have fun together because we still did. Movies, dinner dates, shopping, whatever we did as a couple. We still got along great and always had fun, just like when we were teens. But outside of that, we had opposite interests. I don't like crowded bars with gossiping coworkers, and she doesn't like bowling, smoky poker nights, and video games. It was easy for us to have fun without each other's company. One evening while sitting alone at my computer, she got home from the bar and came in to tell me about her evening. This was not uncommon, as her nights out were usually late, and we would chat for a few minutes before she went to bed. The conversation was typical. Her group all met up at a favorite bar and hung out. Whatever, I wasn't really paying attention, though part of me did notice her being a little too excited at times. It's hard to explain, but the way she talked was just off. But I didn't think much of it right then. She finished speaking and headed to bed. It wasn't until the following evening that something hit me. She was at work while I was home alone. There was just something about the story she'd been telling me over the past several weeks, and especially the one from the previous evening that began to stand out. It was as if warning sirens were going off in my subconscious, and while I pieced together these anomalies, my subconscious just suddenly took over, and I started snooping through her side of the bedroom. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Nothing immediately stood out as unusual until I noticed her old laptop under her side of the bed. And that's when I found the stories saved on Microsoft Word. There were several, and I already knew the gist of each and every one of them. Stories of bar hopping nights, karaoke nights, sporting events, and out-of-town business meetings with her friends and coworkers. I remembered each and every one of them, from the small talk we had after work to longer discussions over dinner. What she neglected to mention were the sordid affairs that also apparently took place on those nights out. Graphic and extremely detailed events of numerous sexual encounters with one of her coworkers. This one in particular was the one she spoke of very often. I'd even met him a few times too. And here were wildly explicit stories of her having sex with him in his vehicle, at hotels, and at his place, described in a level of detail that I could not comprehend from someone like her. The next several weeks were the worst days of my life. When the literal only person in the world that you truly trust betrays you, you end up in a very dark place. Many life-altering events nearly happened during this time, and it was very hard to get through. Part of it still haunts me to this day. Naturally, when I confronted her, she denied everything, claiming they were just fantasies and nothing more. It didn't matter how much I argued to try and get her to admit to them, she refused. No matter how much I pointed out that the times, dates, events, and people were real, she agreed but claimed the sex was not. The most she admitted was that she likely would have eventually cheated on me had I not looked at her laptop and put a stop to it. After weeks of fighting about broken trust, I decided I wasn't going to be able to let it go. It would always be in the back of my mind, especially if I wasn't 100% sure if she was telling the truth or not. And personally, I've never been a forgiving person either, never. You want forgiveness? Ask Jesus. I've been through too much in my life to be treated like a doormat and have never had a problem writing those off who betray me. I spoke with a divorce attorney and found that with limited assets and no children, a no-fault divorce would be the quickest and easiest way to end things. We'd obviously gotten married way too young and weren't ready for such a commitment. I ordered the divorce documents from the lawyer and promised to speak with him after everything was done. Getting her to agree to a no-fault divorce should have been straightforward since I had proof of her unfaithfulness. Secretly, I had saved all her stories and a few other minor pieces of evidence I found the day after discovering the laptop, and planned on telling her I had them should she refuse. I was really trying to minimize any embarrassment for her. I just wanted a quick, clean break without pinning any blame on anyone. Yet what happened next I could not have anticipated. She fought and argued, of course, that I expected, but she cycled through several points of the emotional spectrum, just as I had when I first read her stories, and I told her she'd eventually reach acceptance, except she never did. At her lowest point, she instead started making veiled threats of suicide. I expected that with just a little more time she would finally reach that point of acceptance, and maybe a slight bit of peace that would come with the journey being over. But no, she stayed in a depressed, monotone state, almost on autopilot each day as if nothing mattered anymore, and the suicide comments continued. I was so upset that she put me on such a painful roller coaster that I finally came to terms with, only for her to start threatening her life. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. I didn't want her dead. I just wanted to leave. Her threats, pleas, and promises became too much to handle. So I did exactly what I didn't want to do. I agreed to stay in the relationship. Even after I told her that the trust was gone and I would never look at her the same way again, she didn't care. I was certain the only reason she didn't want to fail at her marriage was the fear of disappointing her parents. They were always the one opinion she cared about above all else. So we stayed together. There isn't much I can say other than that with time, we finally arrived at our normal. It was a normal that by all accounts seemed like a happy, loving couple, but I was still angry inside. I spent years making snarky comments about her infidelity, which she always seemed to brush off without arguing back. It was almost as if she recognized it as a release to cope with my anger. Over time, I stopped altogether. We continued advancing in our careers, bought a bigger house, and eventually had 3 kids together. And last week was our 20th wedding anniversary. I'm not going to sit here and say I've been agonizing in silence all these years because it wouldn't be true. We are and have always been very compatible people and do get along great. Plus, our kids make our lives more complete. We have a great life. But it is always in the back of my mind. I do believe she has spent the last 18 years working to show she can be faithful and trusted. And I do believe she has been this whole time. But it doesn't matter, and it hasn't mattered. The thing is, I quit caring 18 years ago. Anytime she goes out with friends or travels on extended business trips, I genuinely do not care what she does. The jealousy and protective nature natural to any husband is long gone and dead, and that will never come back. So the gaping wound eventually healed to an old scar, and like many scars, sometimes it still tingles with pain. This most often happens around our anniversary, because that is usually when people start gushing at us what they think is our perfect storybook marriage. The beautiful young couple, high school sweethearts that are still together today. They always say, I can't help but clench my jaw and try to ignore the sickening feeling in my stomach every time someone comments or regales stories about how perfect we've always been. It's something that gets mentioned periodically by friends, family, and even our kids, but anniversaries are always over the top. The outpouring is too much. I scream inside and want desperately to tell every one of those people that this paragon relationship they all hold on a pedestal was built on lies, infidelity, threats, and coercion. I've wanted to tell every person that's brought it up since it first happened.